So, Brad, I haven't left this room in 8.5 days.
8.5. Wow. That's impressive. Okay, I see some light coming in from the side of your frame. Is there a sliding door that gives you outside access?
Yeah, that goes out to the pool. And then I have a bathroom, so I got that going for me.
Well, that's a good thing to have when you stay in the same room for 8+ days, like having a bathroom. Well, you got a pool. You have the pool. So, I mean, in a pinch.
Look, yeah, if you have a pool, do you really need a bathroom?
It's, question for the ages. And then what? I guess just meals brought to your door?
You need a bathroom.
Hold on, you gotta be quiet, kid. I'm recording. I'm in here like a prisoner. When I would like some food, then I text or water. Gina gets a text, and then she's like, "Okay, I'll bring you something." And she sets it down outside the door, and then I wait a minute or two, and I open the door and go get the food, and then I close the door again, and that's how my life works now. It seems.
Do you like hold your breath when you open the door out of like as just a conscientious gesture? I mean, are you masking when you get the food?
I usually put a mask on if I'm going to be out for any appreciable length of time. Or if the door's gonna be open for like more than just a moment. But yeah, I do hold my breath, which is probably useless. I don't know.
Hey, I mean, she's avoided it so far, right? And you're doing something correctly.
Yeah, so she's been masking outside, like inside the house, except like her bedroom is basically a clean zone, and the rest of it is her wearing a mask. And but like, wiping down surfaces constantly and all of the fun stuff. Don't get COVID. That's the lesson. That's the big TLDR.
I will continue attempting not to get COVID. You've got a real good gravelly sick voice. This is not like just a deep sick voice. There's a gravel to it.
In a world gone mad, only two men can stand against the oncoming tide.
You should hang on to that. Anyway,
Brad and Will tackle this week's Tech Pod, kind of.
We're going to run a classic episode.
Yeah, a classic patron episode. So if you are not a patron of the show, this is a little taste of what you've been missing. This week, we talked to our friend Doug Ellison from JPL.
Yes.
Well, 2 years ago, I guess now almost a year and a half ago.
The Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Yes. He takes photographs on Mars for that's his job. He operates the Curiosity rover's hazard cameras, as I recall.
Yes. Actually, I mean, if you've been listening to the main show for a long time, you have heard him. We had him on about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
On the main feed, but that was his second appearance. We actually had him on as a patron spotlight on the patron episode first.
A couple months before, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we brought this is a classic patron ep. Doug talks about what it's like to work at JPL and like what it's like to take pictures on Mars, and we talk about data transfer rates between in the what is it, interplanetary network, I guess. How communication satellites on Mars are cool and make things better. Mm-hmm. It's a good chat. It's a wide ranging, and we think you'll enjoy it. So if you like that, you should also check out episode 71, which is when we talked to Doug about Perseverance. That was right before the 17 minutes of terror, I think is what they call that, where the lander landed and did all of its stuff with the jets and the rockets and the landing and the Glaven. So yeah. That's it. Sorry, there's no new episode this week, folks, but we're hoping I'll be back at full strength in time for next week's show. So
I think you have a valid excuse.
I feel like I have a valid excuse. I'm going to go and tell you this sucks. Really, seriously, wear a mask, people. Get your shots. Don't get this. It is bad.
There is a bad wave building right now. I
mean, look, at this point, it's like one of those surf parks in China where the wave just never stops, and then you see that one person falls and it takes everybody with them, and then they all get sucked under. And anyway, yeah, don't get COVID. That's my advice. It really blows.
That's good advice. Here's some other good advice. Listen to this episode and enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a good pithy way to start this episode.
Can we talk about my velour ear cups, or should we save that for the episode next week? Because
we have a member of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's the last A, right?
Yes, it is. Good morning.
Yeah. Hey, Doug's here. Doug Ellison. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure.
I am very excited to get to sit down and nerd out for a while with somebody who takes photos on Mars on the reg. That's I feel like there's a very small handful of people in the world that we could have this conversation with.
I want to kind of build a registry of Martian photographers. It is not a big list.
It's a very exclusive club for sure.
Yeah.
That Flickr group, real small, it turns out. Doug, can you, like, for people who aren't as active in the Discord, can you introduce yourself and tell them who you are and kind of how you ended up doing what you're doing a little bit?
Through a series of highly mistaken adventures. So, yeah, my name's Doug Ellison. I've been at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab for about 10 years. I started off doing kind of as a producer for visualization projects for education and public outreach, stuff like Eyes on the Solar System, DSN Now, some pretty cool stuff to help the public understand what NASA's getting up to.
You did DSN Now?
Yeah, that was my idea.
The thing, so this is the website where you can go and see what the radios are talking to. It's fabulous.
Yes.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. We used to have this installed like binary sat-in workstations at the lab projected into our mission control room. And I was like, guys, if we made that JSON file public, we can make a website that does the same thing. And everyone went, oh, can we do that? And then from there, I moved to do some stuff with the HoloLens early on. There's a group at JPL called the Ops Lab that kind of uses emerging tech to improve our efficiency for doing mission operations. And they said, hey, put this on. I'm like, I'm in. And so I worked on Destination Mars, which was a public spin-off version of our tool called OnSite that lets people walk around Mars using a HoloLens. And then from there, I moved into mission operations about 4 and a bit years ago for the Curiosity mission. I was asked, hey, we need some engineering camera uplink people. Are you interested? And I was like, hold my executive beer. And so the training took about 3 months. And then so by the beginning of 2017, I was certified to operate cameras on the Curiosity rover. And then I reached out to Steve Squires, who is the principal investigator for Spirit and Opportunity, the 2 older rovers. And I went, hey, Steve, do you need an engineering camera uplink lead for Opportunity as well? And he's like, I went to grad school with the guy who runs those cameras. I'm sure I can have a word. And so for the last year of Opportunity's mission, I was on Opportunity as well, because the cameras were very, very similar. So using one was just like using the other. And so since then, I've been operating the cameras on Curiosity for almost 4 years. And about 1.5 years ago, they said, would you like to lead the engineering camera team on Curiosity? I was like, yes, I would. And it was a bit of a kind of an imposter syndrome moment. I was like, don't be stupid. I'm a temperamental artist with a background in multimedia design. But then I was like, let's try it, see what happens. And so, the idiots put me in charge of the cameras.
This is the thing. Like when I meet people from JPL, it's such a weird mix of multidisciplinary. Like there's definitely like a ton of hardcore science people, but there's also people with hardcore science / other backgrounds and engineering backgrounds that like end up, it's not your normal group of like, your prototypical pocket protector egghead heads is my experience.
No, it's far more like a college campus than a government facility. It's a really strange place, actually. One of my compatriots for the engineering cameras and Opportunity was also a record-breaking hot air balloonist and for a while Bette Midler's PA.
Yeah, see,
right?
That makes sense.
Why not? Right?
Yeah, that reads.
She got bored of that, thought, I'm going to go and be a geologist, and then went to JPL and started taking pictures on Mars. So, it's fine.
If you can manage Bette Midler, you can manage a rover a few hundred light minutes away.
Yeah, they both have mood swings, but it's fine. You can work around that.
Curiosity is the only rover still operating. I think you just mentioned that Opportunity has been retired. It's just the one now.
Just the one rover. You got one at work, one on the way, and then about 200 miles north of Curiosity, we got the InSight lander, which was the kind of geophysics lander that arrived about a couple of years ago. And then there's a bunch of foreign missions arriving about the same time that our new rover Perseverance does in February. There's
and there's also orbiters too, right?
Yeah, there's a whole fleet. So we've got going back in time, we've got the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter from about 2005. We've got Maven that went up in about 2012, 2014-ish. And then there's the European Trace Gas Orbiter as well. And in Europe has a super old mission called Mars Express. And actually, we talk to those with the rover. That's how we get all of our data home, is basically using the orbiters as relay satellites, because in terms of kind of watt hours per megabit, in terms of communication energy efficiency, you can get data home a lot more quickly and a lot more efficiently by borrowing an orbiter to do it for you.
Oh man, you're immediately touching on like the super nerdy, complex questions I want to ask instead of the first question we have here, which is just like, "What's your day like?" But We should probably start at the start, though.
Start at the beginning and get straight through.
What is your average day like? I mean, but actually, like, 'cause I think the pandemic makes that question a lot more interesting because you're sitting in what appears to be your home office right now. So,
it is, home office / closet / highly messy. The camera is very carefully targeted to avoid the nonsense either side of me.
One area inside my office that's safe to shoot.
So, I mean, you're interacting with a device that is, I think you said, between 4 and 20 light minutes away at any given time from your house.
So we've joked about this, is that in many respects, the fact we're working from home, our job isn't that much more remote. It's like 11 extra miles.
Right.
And it doesn't make that much difference.
That's a rounding error at that point. Right?
Yeah. I actually went and did the math to figure out if my home is on average more or less distant from Mars than JPL is, which is 11 miles to my north, and it's about 50 meters in it. It took a little while getting used to doing the whole remote work thing, but now we're doing remote. Honestly, the job is basically the same. And a lot of the people involved in mission operations were already remote. You've got a core engineering team at JPL who look after the rover in terms of checking its data, planning any kind of maintenance stuff, bolting all the commands together to get them sent to the rover and sending them. And the engineering camera team, which I am, we're part of that side of the kind of equation. But then there are science instruments, and the people running those science instruments are scientists, and they are at their home institutions all around the globe, but now they're at their homes all around the globe. And so we've got people from San Diego, people from Canada, France, Spain, Russia even, all partaking in this mission from their homes. And the job itself hasn't changed very much. We plan rover activities normally 3 and sometimes 4 days a week. And the shift itself hasn't really changed. It's a series of meetings through the day that basically increase the fidelity of our intentions. And alongside those meetings, we are writing the commands to do what we want to try and do with the mission. And the last thing we do at the end of the day is basically put all the commands we've written for the whole day into a big simulation. If the rover finishes that simulation right side up, we assume it's good. And then it gets sent to the rover the next time the rover wakes up. And then typically a day or 2 days later, we'll come back. We will look at all the data that's come down from the rover in the meantime, see if it's healthy, and start the whole thing over again. And that job hasn't really changed at all. Early on, we really struggled with attention spread. Like we weren't, you used to be able to turn your head around and speak to a different person on the mission. Now you are either on one of multiple WebExes or Slack. We've got our own chat client as well that we use internally, which is the correct line of communication for a particular kind of thing you want to ask somebody. And then you got the challenge of trying to train somebody at the same time. Now, normally you'd be sat side by side. Now, basically, we would do it as sharing a desktop on a workstation that's up at JPL, but then also having a phone call at the same time. So you've now got kind of 4 or 5 concurrent lines of communication going, and the spread can get pretty tricky and stuff can fall through the gaps. But we've now, in our little team, we've actually fully trained someone from beginning to being certified remotely. We finished training somebody remotely, and we just started training a third person remotely. And I was speaking to someone yesterday. He was like, when do you think you might want to go back to JPL? And I was like, honestly, we can do this from home forever. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. I miss my colleagues because we're a small, close-knit team and we like each other and we do cool stuff together. But I'll happily do this from home forever. It's absolutely fine.
I mean, it's not like there's a hands-on component to this mission, right? Like the data kind of goes anywhere. So
the one bit that is hands-on is the fact we have basically a clone of the rover sat at JPL. It's the testbed rover called Maggie. It stands for something, God knows what. And so 1 or 2 people have been going to the lab to do stuff with Maggie, even if it's just housekeeping for our testbed rover. It has housekeeping activities too, keeping its battery healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Getting moved from venue to venue. And then we've got a big flight software update we want to do, probably middle of next year. And that big flight software update has to go through a lot of testing with our testbed rover. And so they're going in and doing shifts, 1 or 2 engineers at a time to do regression testing and stuff like that. So that's kind of the only hands-on thing is our testbed rover that's still back at JPL. Fortunately, you can't drive that home.
I have so many questions I want to ask that I immediately am checking myself. Like, is that a state secret? Is that some aspect of tradecraft I should not bring up? Like, do you have any insight into the programming that goes on with this thing? I know you're more in imaging, but like, I immediately want to know like what language are they writing the rover software in and stuff like that.
So the rover runs. It's basically a first generation iMac inside. It's called a RAD 750. It's a commodity product any aerospace company can buy off the shelf. It's like 133 megahertz, 128 meg of RAM, woohoo, and about 4 gigs of flash. And it runs an operating system by a company called Wind River Systems that's called VxWorks. It's basically a real-time Nix-based OS. And there's a huge bunch. The flight software is largely C. But on top of that, the way the flight software is exposed to us in terms of commanding the vehicle is actually surprisingly simple. Like you could look at a command to take a picture with the rover and go, oh, okay, yeah, you're asking it to take a picture with that camera and that camera pointed in that direction with these settings. That makes sense. It's not a million miles from writing like Lewis scripts and stuff like that. You know, it's not or JSON type stuff. You could understand it, and that's how we interface with the rover is through commands like that. And in fact, one of the steps we have in our planning cycle is called master submaster walkthrough, where literally a line at a time, we read out the commands we're going to send to the rover. We literally read them out. And
hold on, like in a room full of people?
Like a table read.
Yeah, think of it as like a code review almost. And literally we'll go through it a line at a time. And yeah, I'll pseudo code it, but it's like, okay, you know, we'll go to sleep and we'll wake up at this time, and then we'll kick off this. It's called a submaster, which is a bunch of sequences. And inside that submaster, we will run this thing, we'll run this thing, we'll run this thing, we'll run this thing. Then we'll stow the mast. Then we will do this thing. Then we'll talk to this orbiter for this many minutes. Then we'll go to sleep, wake up at this time. We'll then turn on this instrument, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually like I can read through in our master sequences or our submaster sequences and figure out what the rover's up to. It's pretty human readable. When
you run these sequences on the simulator on Maggie, do you like have cameras on? Are you watching what happens?
So the exact, we can take the commands we run on the real rover and use them on Maggie. But the way the rover
you don't do that for everything though, right?
No, in fact, it's only anything basically that's new or unusual will typically get run on the testbed first. But when you're 8 years in, there's very little that's new or unusual. So we will regularly send stuff, the smallest tweaks, like I'm going to take a picture again, we're going to point it somewhere else. It's fine. You just send it to the rover. But as with the real rover with Maggie, there's no real way to watch what it's doing apart from its telemetry. Like if you're doing a shift on the testbed, you're sat at a desk that's 6 feet from it, and it's big and it's scary and it can move and it can point its mast and stuff. But the only insight we get into what the rover is doing is basically these gigantic emails we get from the rover about typically 4 to 5 and sometimes 6 times a day that are a couple of 100 megabits worth of data that starts with basically a dear diary of what the rover thinks it's been doing, and then all the data products that it generated. And
wow.
it's and in fact the pipelines that look at like the dear diary stuff actually then email us with anything that's not completely benign and ordinary. They kind of have different levels of importance, from like, this is just an activity, this is something that's a low warning, this is a high warning, this is critical, this is a fatal, what's
like a low warning is like the wheels are turning but it's not moving or something.
Low warning might be I tried to stop doing this thing but it wasn't doing it anymore, and that's basically because the thing finished quickly, so it doesn't matter. They're kind of very, very benign. A warning high might be, I tried to do a thing with this camera, but it didn't quite work. So I'm going to mark that camera as sick and then carry on doing the rest of my stuff.
Okay.
And then we actually did a little flight software update to our spare flight computer a couple of weeks ago, and warm rebooted it as part of that process. And that would be a fatal warning. It's like, hey, this computer just restarted. That's bad, right?
Okay. It throws the warning even if you did it intentionally.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, when you're doing anything particularly new or unusual, you'll write it up as a kind of report in advance and say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is why. This is how it works. And this is what I expect the rover to tell me afterwards, so that you're not going to get triggered by a fatal, like, what the hell was that? No, I said it was going to do that. Oh, okay. You knew what you were doing. That's fine.
No surprises.
Did you, just to reiterate, did you say hundreds of megabytes per day back from that thing?
So I said megabits.
Oh, megabits. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I heard that. I was like, oh my God, is that okay? Because that was like an order of magnitude more than.
So it's got better since we landed. When we landed, we basically had the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Mars Odyssey, which is even an older orbiter from, would you believe it, 2001. And from those early on, we'd get something between 100 to 500 megabits per pass, and we'd do a couple of passes per day. So early on in the mission, in total, we get something like 500 to 1,000 megabits per day in total. So divided by 8, call it, 100 megabytes roughly in a day.
On a good day, wow.
But these days, we're super lucky because we've got MAVEN, which is a new NASA orbiter, and the European Trace Gas Orbiter, and they both act as relays too, and they have newer, shinier radios. And so the link between the rover and those orbiters is better, so we can squirt more data through it. So we're typically getting 1 to 2 gigabits a day these days. So, 150, 200 megabytes, it would be a good day.
Are the satellites or orbits synchronized in such a way to kind of maximize exposure and transmission sort of line of sight?
So,
or is it kind of hard
unfortunately
to
not.
Stuff like that?
Sadly not. They're there to do science, and we're in the way, basically. So they
not the primary concern.
Yeah, their orbits. I mean, there's different orbits for different spacecraft. So Mars Odyssey, MRO, they are synced to certain times of day locally. They are a lot like some of the weather satellites here on Earth, actually. In that they cross the equator at about the same time, morning and evening, and Mars rotates beneath it, basically. So an MRO pass with Curiosity will always be about 3 or 4 o'clock local time.
Yeah.
Odyssey will be a bit later. TGO, the European orbiter, and MAVEN, our orbiter, they kind of more atmospheric study kind of stuff, and so their orbits are a bit more elliptical, and so they don't sync up in the same way. And so those times of passes kind of drift through the day over time, and so they're not quite as predictable. But we know when they're going to happen in advance, and so we schedule. There's a whole process of kind of negotiating which overflights you're going to use, or which overflights get used by which spacecraft. Because if it's flying overhead, the Trace Gas Orbiter could see, for example, our rover and InSight to the north at the same time, and so you go, okay, which one's it going to speak to, right? And you have to negotiate all of that in advance. It's
fascinating to me that you talk about different teams competing for time and resources on these things, because like as a layman, I tend to think purely in technical terms about the limitations of what you're doing, but now you're talking about like bureaucratic restrictions also getting in the way. Like that must be like a minefield to navigate.
It is, and especially when you think, okay, we've negotiated, and we've actually come up with a really cunning system for negotiating our passes with our lander friends in the north. But then you got say the Perseverance rover coming, and they've got ideas of things they want to do, and sometimes they'll use us as a test bed in advance. So we've been doing some test communication passes with the orbiters on the Perseverance rover's behalf to test stuff before it gets there. We've basically been pretending to be Perseverance and doing different communication strategies so that when it lands, it knows that's going to work. And so we had a couple of those this past weekend. There were passes that we'd have loved to have got a couple hundred megabits of data home, but instead we were pretending to be another rover, and so we weren't sending any data home.
Are like on a mission like this, I know that like on big infrastructure projects, like, telescopes or space telescopes or whatever, like instrument time is scheduled sometimes months or years in advance. And it's like the whole goal of the project for like a big new telescope is, hey, let's use every moment of dark sky that we have to get the most return out of this investment. Is Curiosity scheduled the same way, or is it possible to do that on the ground?
So because we have wheels and we move, our environs change. That said, we've just finished up a scientific campaign that has basically been 8 years in the making. From orbit, we had mapped some minerals on the ground, and the science team were like, that's where we want to go and do everything. We want to touch that with the robotic arm. We want to take pictures of it. We want to drill it. We want to put it in the lab inside the rover twice, and we've been kind of leading up to that. And so the planning happens at kind of different cadences. The tactical timeline is, okay, we're talking to the rover in 9 hours. What are we going to tell it to do?
Yeah.
Then there's this kind of super tactical process that is basically, we'll be talking to it on Friday, and we'll be talking to it on Monday, and we're going to be talking to it next Wednesday. Roughly speaking, what are we going to tell it to do? Let's kind of scaffold that out roughly. And then there is, at the kind of broader thematic level, you'll have like a campaign team around a certain scientific area of interest, planning, okay, these are all the things we want to do in this area. We think we want to go here, and that'll probably take a couple of days. We want to go here, that'll take a couple of days. So they'll even work with our rover driving team to figure out how long is it going to take to get from there to there. So how long will this entire campaign take? And sometimes the whole mission kind of pose changes. It's like, okay, we've done the stuff over here. We now want to go and do stuff over here. So now it's like head down and sprint, let's maximize driving time. And science will kind of back off a little bit and not make as many requests. They won't ask to, turn over every single freaking pebble between A and B. They will just say, we want to go look at the new shiny thing that's half a mile away.
Okay.
And that's kind of actually where we are now.
That's just, it's incredible that you can be like, hey, we think there's something interesting a half mile away. And like, you have the power and the capability to do that with this rover.
And on the day to day, like with a big telescope like Keck or even Hubble or James Webb when it launches, the main constraint is we have so many observing hours per year, and we will compete for them, right?
Yeah.
With us, our constraints are on the day to day, and they are power, which basically turns into a total amount of awake time, data volume, like how much data can we get home, and then planning complexity, i.e., are we trying to do so much in this given plan that actually the meat on the ground won't be able to figure it out in time? And so we have limits on how much power we can use, how much data we're going to send home, and how complex that plan is going to be. And the only impact remote work has had is that we've taken the maximum complexity for any given plan and turned it down just a tiny, tiny bit. And honestly, if you didn't know, you wouldn't have noticed. It's been very subtle.
Are you all like, do you work on a 25-hour clock, or is this stuff because I remember when when Sojourner and Pathfinder landed, like there were a lot of news stories about
Mars time. Yeah.
Here's your special 25 hour a day wristwatch and all that stuff. Do you guys do you all still do that or not really?
Can you before he answers, can you contextualize what the 24-hour or 25-hour figure is?
So,
is that like is that the sort of broadcast window of exposure, or
so a day on Mars is basically 24 hours and 40 minutes. So let's say the rover. We send our commands to the rover at basically 9:30 in the morning rover time. That's when we talk to the rover. It moves around a little bit based on kind of scheduling conflicts with other missions, but generally, rover wakes up about 9 o'clock. We talk to it at 9:30, and then it does its thing for the day. But if your day is 24 hours and 40 minutes, that means let's say that we had to have commands ready for 6 o'clock tonight. Tomorrow, that's 6:40. Then it's 7:20. Then it's 8 o'clock, then it's 8:40, then it's 9:20, then it's 10 o'clock. And 2 weeks from now, that readiness is actually 5 o'clock in the morning. And 2 weeks from then, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon again, but you've lost an entire day. And so early on in the mission, you want to make the most of every single freaking day you have. And so you work the Martian night shift as far as the rover is concerned. You get up when the rover sends data home, and you've got until the time it wakes up the next day to tell it what to do next. And
this is just to make sure that you get as much as you can before in case the rover fails early.
Yeah, you want to be responsive to every single day, right? What you do after about 3 months, because it turns out people have things like families that don't like you saying, okay, I'm off to work at 4 in the morning and you don't get back till 11 at night or something. And it really, really does screw with your head. It really does. I'm fortunate I've not done it, but I know a lot of people who have.
It sounds like the worst jet lag imaginable.
You're in a permanent state of jet lag. Cast your mind back to when Spirit and Opportunity landed in 2004. You now had two rovers on the surface of Mars. They are 12 Martian time zones apart. So whichever one you're working on, you've got jet lag. If you switch from the Spirit rover to the Opportunity rover, congratulations, Earth doesn't give a shit. You've now got 12 hours of Martian jet lag. So you can only do it for so long. And so what happens then is you go into a phase that's kind of, it's a concession to Mars time, but also a concession to the fact that we're human and we live on this planet. So when Earth time and Mars time line up in a way whereby basically Pacific office hours are rover's nap time, we will use the rover, we'll command it on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. When they don't line up that well, we will enter a thing called restricted planning, where we will send commands. And like, for example, this week is a restricted planning week. So we had a planning shift on Monday. And at the end of Monday, we had 2 days worth of commands to send to the rover. And they all got sent late Monday night, maybe even early Tuesday morning. We then will come back in on Wednesday. And the first of those 2 days will have happened. The second won't yet. But what you do is you say, okay, here's the next 2 days, right? And when you come in on Friday, you've now got the 2 days of Monday and the first day of Wednesday on the ground. Okay, now we're going to do 3 days to get us through the weekend. And then you come in on Monday and you've got the first 2 days of the weekend, but not the third. And so what ends up happening is, let's say you want to drive as fast as you can, right, for this whole week. Well, Monday, you say, okay, well, we need to know where we are on Wednesday. So we'll drive on the first day. The second day is now in the blind. We don't know where the rover's going to be, but we've got to give it something to do. Did Will just drop out?
Oh, gosh, he did. Yes. Oh, he's back.
And Will is back.
So on Earth, communications.
Yeah, seriously?
Less than reliable.
You good, Will? You dropped out for a minute there.
No, I don't know if he can hear us. Hey, Will?
Yeah, I don't think he can. Will is in safe mode.
Nothing? Okay.
Yeah, by far the weakest link in the chain right now for us is WebEx anyway. So
yeah.
And VPN. Actually, yesterday, we almost pulled yesterday's planning because of VPN issues.
Like that is exactly the kind of mundane detail that I wanted to ask you about, but I don't know if you want to dig into it or not. But just because like VPN is such an aspect of almost everyone's drudgery right now.
Oh yeah.
The idea that it's even involved in interplanetary communications is like kind of surreal to me in a way.
We had someone whose internet access was being flaky, and so the project bought them a 4G hotspot as a backup.
Wow.
Because if they're on shift, you don't want to, we can't do any of X because their internet went out, right?
That is, yes. That's quite a bit different from your standard corporate parent just saying, like, I just figured out, deal with it. Like, if you lose mission time, like, this whole endeavor is for nothing, right?
I mean, I've been with it, 4 years, and to my knowledge, I've had one shift whereby the digital infrastructure was flaky enough that we had to say, no, rover gets nothing today.
Wow.
Rover can be on its own for 2 days.
That's got to be heartbreaking.
It's really frustrating, especially been working all day on a set of commands, and it's like, yeah, that was for nothing.
Yeah. And I assume if you miss your window, it's not like you can just try again the next day, right? Like, things have to keep moving forward.
So what we do with the rovers, we actually say to it, okay, these are the 2 days of things we want you to do. And then we'll give it what's called run out, which is basically another week of wake up, talk to an orbiter, go to sleep. Wake up, talk to the spacecraft, go to sleep. It's like basic empty housekeeping stuff for the rest. So that if for some reason, so let's say on Monday, right, we had a shift, everything went great, sent 2 days of commands to the rover and another 10 days now of run out. If for some reason yesterday we hadn't been able to finish that planning shift, rover doesn't care. Rover would have waken up on the third day after Monday and gone, well, I don't have those new commands, but I'm going to do my basic engineering housekeeping, and then I'm going to stay awake for a couple of hours, then I'm going to go to bed, and then I'll wake up for my communication passes, and it will do it automatically for 10 days. And so we got 10 days to basically, I swear, baby, I can change. I can send you some commands tomorrow. And the worst version of that is that if for some reason LA stopped existing, at the end of those 10 days, it then goes into a thing called an up-loss timer. And the up-loss timer, and all spacecraft in deep space have this, which is look, if you don't hear anything for a month, it's probably not you, it's probably them. But just in case it is, at the end of that time, maybe start trying to swap stuff out automatically just in case it is something with you and you need to start swapping computers and radios and stuff. It'll do it autonomously and cycle through different combinations of computers and radios to try and get back in touch with home.
Is that just activating various redundancies that are built in, like swapping
so we have
fallback antenna and stuff like that?
Yeah, we have two flight computers, and then we have two completely different communication subsystems. So we can talk through the UHF relay with the orbiters, or we can talk. I mean, the commands get sent directly from Earth straight to the rover, but we can also receive data directly from the rover. It's just really inefficient to do it, and it can do it in two ways. It can do it with a little, like, tiny little satellite dish. Basically, it's a directional high gain antenna. But it needs to know what time it is because it needs to know where the Earth is to point it at the Earth. But there's also a low gain antenna that's just like a little stick on the back of the rover. And that doesn't need to know what time it is or where Earth is. And we can get into that at like 10 bits per second if we need to.
Blazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there like a sextant? How does the rover know where it is on Mars?
Sextant is the right word. So we look at the sun. So we have a gyro, an IMU on the rover, just like your cell phone. Mm-hmm. But what we will do is every couple of hours that thing has been turned on, which it turns out is like every about 400-500 meters of driving, basically. The assumption is that the rover's own knowledge of exactly which way is up has drifted by a few degrees. So we will then do what's called a frame update. And we will say, okay, we're going to reset the odometer here. We're going to go see where the sun is. And it knows roughly where the sun is, so it'll go and take a picture of it. And go, okay, the sun's actually right there, which means my XYZ is, my pitch roll yaw is this. And then we'll propagate there for the next couple 100 meters. And so, and so every now and again in the raw images, so, all these images end up online the second they reach the ground. You can see, and it looks just like something broken with the camera. It's just this big white blob and a streak. And it's actually us looking at the sun to figure out exactly which way we're pointing. And Spirit and Opportunity did that. Insight will have done that. And it's kind of cool that we, occasionally we will look at the stars, a star, to figure out, which way's north. And the rover's knowledge of which way's north is really good as a result, which is super useful for if you want to figure out where to point your cameras.
Can you use a compass on Mars? Is there magnetic field on Mars?
All that's left is kind of this
was stripped, right?
There you go. Yeah. See?
Wow. Good job, Brad.
All that's left is a slight residual magnetic field. There's like little bits of north and south scattered all over the place. It's not like a compass would work and point north. It's kind of a little, very low, lumpy magnetic field all over the place.
So, I mean, I assume the rovers have to be like incredibly hardened then, right? Because I assume there's a lot of like solar wind or kind of cosmic radiation. Radiation
we get
hitting the planet.
We get single bit errors, double bit errors, and so the flight computer.
People talk about that problem on Earth, like, oh, you need to get ECC RAM because a cosmic ray might flip a bit in your RAM, but you guys deal with that constantly.
That happens all the time, and so we have rad hardened CPUs, which is why our CPU is like freaking 30 years old almost, right? It's because we're not chasing a 7 nanometer CPU, right? We're chasing something that will actually survive cosmic ray hits. A cosmic ray coming straight through one feature on an IC will flip it if it's not big enough. And so by having, the virtually steam powered CPU, then cosmic rays don't upset it, right? Because each feature on the CPU is so damn big, a single cosmic ray isn't significant enough to flip it. But the RAM and the flash memory are both error correcting, and one of those things we get in the list of, hey, dear diary, here's what I did today is, okay, this particular register of memory had a single bit error and I fixed it. Or sometimes double bit errors. They're rarer, obviously. And there are certain parts of both the RAM and the flash memory that are more susceptible because they spend their time slightly hotter. And so they are slightly more kind of fragile.
Sure.
When they did, first, John Bobcar in the Discord had a question about this, and they asked if the cameras degrade from radiation, because on ISS we anybody who looks at the pictures that come from ISS sees the hot pixels that are on the Canons and the consumer DSLRs that they shoot with on the station. Do you all have the same problem?
So we get cosmic ray hits on our cameras, but again, they're pretty lo-fi. So my engineering cameras are 1 megapixel and black and white. Right, so they are just above potato quality, but not much. And we do get cosmic ray hits, and you see them as big streaks through the sensor. The difference between is that we will occasionally have hot pixels that are baked one way or the other forever. The real enemy for our cameras is temperature, because they don't like being warm, and anything above 24, 25 degrees centigrade, and they tend to produce images that are so noisy that you can't really see what the hell's going on. And on a planet where the average temperature is like minus 60, minus 80 centigrade, you wouldn't think that's a problem. Unfortunately, we brought a really big hot rock with us called our RTG, right? Our power supply stuck out the back of the rover, the radioisotope junk in the trunk. And our rear hazard cameras are parked right next to it. And so we measure both, have like a little electronics box and the CCD to take pictures. And the electronics box get hot when you use it. The CCD doesn't, but typically speaking, the navigation cameras up on the Mars will be at minus 10, minus 20, maybe above freezing point, kind of during local noon during the summer. The front hazard cams are about the same. The rear hazard cameras are typically 20 degrees hotter just by being next to the RTG. And in fact, literally a couple of weeks ago, I was like, they're getting really noisy, and they do get worse over time by virtue of being hot for so long. When we first had noisy, crappy images, we thought, is this because we're parked next to the RTG? But it's not. It's just the temperature. It's not the decay.
Oh, you're not getting particles.
Yeah, it's not the actual radiation coming out of the RTG, which is negligible. It's just they're hot. And when they're hot, they produce more noise, and also they are more susceptible to cosmic ray hits.
Well, those rear cameras are important because you all drive back the direction you intended to now, right?
So Opportunity did that. Yeah, Opportunity drove backwards a lot because it had one steering actuator that was burst. Curiosity, we drive forwards. Okay. And what we've actually done is, compared to other rovers, the suspension has basically been flipped so that on paper we have more traction if we drive backwards. That means whatever you get yourself stuck into, you should be able to get out of, right?
Smart.
And for the autonomous driving stuff, they tend to use the navigation cameras that are up on the mast in the breeze anyway. And so it'll take a couple of images looking ahead of itself, go, that's safe, and then carry on. Most of the time, in fact, what it's doing is it's just tracking exactly where it is just by doing kind of visual odometry, like a very, very slow version of an optical mouse using our navigation cameras. And we'll just say to it, get over there, because we've looked at it and we know it's safe. And so it'll just trundle its way along. And the only kind of self-checking it's doing is, am I where I think I am, and am I tilting too much, and is the suspension moving too much? We will set limits for that based on what we think is going to happen, and if something worse than that happens, or something's wrong and so stop, then we can do autonomous driving, where we literally say, go as far as you can in this direction given the time available, and it will take loads of pictures and look for hazards and map a route around the dangerous stuff and carry on.
All at 133 megahertz.
It's sweet.
That's amazing.
It's real hot rod. I have a question that probably sounds kind of frivolous, but do you think we're going to see in our lifetimes, or maybe even on Perseverance? Sounds like you've got some knowledge of that project, but do you think the imaging hardware and the transmission capabilities will advance to the point, and this is where the frivolous part comes in, where we will be able to start sending, like, let's say, modern iPhone quality video back from a place like Mars? I mean, I know that's probably pretty low value in a scientific sense, but I think that the value of inspiring the public with footage like that is like not negligible.
So there's many sides to that question. And the first is, if you were to take a video on the surface of Mars, what would it look like? And the answer is, it would be indiscernible from a still image.
That was one of my follow-up questions, is like, is there actually anything going on there that's worth well, but like even a panning shot, I feel like it's got
But I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. And so the cameras we've got on Curiosity, we have the engineering cameras that are like the potato black and white 1 megapixel, that are what we use to get the lay of the land. They're what we use to drive. They're what we use to plan where we're going to put the robotic arms, stuff like that. We also have color science cameras. We have mast cam that are 2 megapixel color. They're basically HD sensors. They're 1600 by 1200. And the same sensor is used for our left and right mast cam up on top of the mast, and the microscope, and the descent imager that's bolted to the rover that took the movie you may have seen we took while we were landing. Mm-hmm. And that movie was about 3 or 4 frames per second. And the reason we've still got these 1 megapixel black and white sensors is because they were basically what was knocking around when Curiosity was being designed. And they were a heritage design from Spirit and Opportunity, which, remember, launched in 2003. So you got to think, well, it was being designed in 2000. Yeah. And they were from a mission that was due to fly in 2001 that got cancelled. And so now the engineering cameras on Curiosity are basically derived from a design started in the mid to late 90s. That's why they're only 1 megapixel. But you think about it, it's like, we're going to have a 1 megapixel CCD in the mid 90s. That's like, whoa, dude, that's amazing, right?
That was a really expensive digital camera for people on Earth.
Yeah. So now basically our engineering cameras are direct descendants of that. Perseverance went, guys, really? We really should think about upgrading. And so we've gone from, the engineering cameras have gone from 1 megapixel in black and white to 20 megapixels and color.
Wow.
The other thing that's changed since Curiosity landed is, when Curiosity landed, we had one very old Mars orbiter and one fairly old Mars orbiter to get our data home. And so our expected return from the surface wasn't that huge. We weren't expecting to get gigabits of data in a day. Now we've got those orbiters still going, and some new ones, which means the amount of data you can get home in a given day is dramatically improved. Therefore, it's worth taking bigger cameras because you can get all that data home, right? There would have been no point taking a 20 megapixel camera on Curiosity. We'd never have got the data home.
Yeah.
Perseverance, everything's a little bit newer. The radios are basically the same. In many ways, Perseverance is a kind of a clone of Curiosity with some very kind of focused upgrades. But the infrastructure around Mars is now dramatically better, so we can get more data home. So these engineering cameras have got a big upgrade. The science cameras are largely the same. So the Mars cam is now called Mars Cam Z. The Z stands for zoom, so they can actually zoom in and out together as a stereo pair. And they will also be able to take movies at a couple of frames per second. But also for Perseverance, and this really is the cool part, and I'm very jealous, For the landing, the only thing we had on Curiosity for landing was that kind of 4 frames per second looking at the bottom of the rover during landing. And that took a couple of weeks to get all that data home. Perseverance has multiple cameras on the back of the entry capsule to watch the parachute deploy. It has a camera on the kind of rocket backpack, the sky crane, looking down at the rover during landing. It has another one on the rover looking up at the sky crane during landing. It has another one on the rover looking down during landing. And these all get turned on and off at different parts during landing for when it's useful. The data gets fed through a USB bus onto a dedicated storage on the rover and then trickled back later, plus a microphone.
Wow.
So you've got multiple camera angles and audio, and they're not like 3 frames per second. They're kind of 25, 30 frames per second.
Wow.
And so we'll be able to, it'll take weeks and weeks and weeks to get all that data home. There's a lot of data, but we'll be able to do an awesome supercut with a soundtrack of landing on Mars. Wow,
that's incredible. What's the target landing date or time
it's
frame?
Middle of February. I think it's. I can't remember exactly what day it is, but it's lunchtime. I do know that. It's early in February.
Wait, this February?
This coming February, yeah.
Oh
Launched.
God, I didn't realize it had launched already.
It's 6 to 9 months basically to get from Earth to Mars.
Oh wow!
It launched from Vandenberg, right?
So Insight launched from Vandenberg. Perseverance launched from Florida. So Insight launching from Vandenberg because it's a very, very, very small light spacecraft. It was very, very small, and you do get a benefit from launching east around the Earth because the Earth's rotating that way already. So you get a couple 100 meters per second benefit of launching east with a rocket. But the smallest, cheapest rocket, basically on NASA's shopping list, was so overpowered for Insight. They're like, we don't need that. And by the way, the East Coast range is going to be kind of really congested at that time. Have you thought about launching out of Vandenberg instead?
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And what was cool is we got to watch a Mars mission launch, and a bunch of us went up to Mount Wilson to watch it. It did kind of half a lap around the Earth, and then the engines on the rocket fired again somewhere over Antarctica to blast on its way to Mars.
Do you have a sense?
That's awesome.
This is I know this is not really your department, but whoever is responsible for calculating the kind of, I guess it's like Newtonian mechanics of hitting a target that far away, that far in the future, like, is there still a lot of pressure felt there, or is that stuff so solved at this point that it's just like plugging numbers into formulas and like
you just use Kerbal, right? That's how it all works now. I assume.
I wonder if there's still a lot of stress.
You sim it in Kerbal. If it lands right way up, you spend the billions on it. It's fine.
Yeah.
So my buddy Mark is actually involved in what's called mission design. It's kind of the big picture trajectory stuff. And you'd think it's just Isaac Newton is driving, divide by X, multiply by this, blah, blah, blah. Congratulations, you've landed on Mars. But there are so many different things that come into play. For example, he worked on the trajectory for Insight. He had to show Insight is going to get from Earth to Mars. He also had to prove that the upper stage of the rocket over the next 50 years was not going to hit Mars.
Wow.
Because the upper stage of the rocket is filthy. Right? It's not been kept in a clean room. It's covered in alligator farts or whatever it is that Florida smells of, right? So, well, actually Vandenberg, so launched out of Vandenberg, but it was built in Alabama, right? So, so you have to prove that various bits of the rocket aren't going to hit Mars. And so when you launch, you aim to miss. That also means that your spacecraft, if it's dead on arrival into space, isn't going to crash into Mars as a dead vehicle, right? And then you have typically 4 or 5 little windows you pre-plan in advance to nudge your trajectory. They're called trajectory correction maneuvers. The very, very poor analogy is an archer shooting an arrow, and while it's flying, you get to nudge it a couple of times, right? But here's a weird one for you. If you're in deep space for 9 months, the pressure of photons bouncing off you is enough that it actually moves your trajectory in that time. So solar pressure is a real thing. Also, your spacecraft is warm, and therefore it's emitting photons of IR energy. They thrust the other way.
Oh, wow.
If you have your spacecraft at an angle towards the sun, those photons now want to impart torque on your spacecraft, and they want to turn it around, which means now you're firing thrusters to keep it pointing back the other way. And even though those thrusters are designed just to turn you around, they also impart a little nudge in one direction as a result. So it's a constantly moving target all the way to Mars. And the last of those trajectory correction maneuvers, you can cancel the last few if you think you're in really good shape, but the last of those trajectory correction maneuvers can be as close as like 6 hours out, because the window, like the point you need to deliver it to at the top of the Martian atmosphere, is incredibly small.
Is that because Mars is small and the atmosphere is thin, or
it's because you're coming in at such a shallow angle that if you're just a little bit high, you'll go very, very long, and if you're a little bit low, you'll come up very, very short. And the difference between going very long and very short is kind of how harsh the entry is. So if you come in too steep, you get very, very hot. You can trash your heat shield, or in some cases, basically, the idea with Mars landing is you get everything done before you're underground. If you come in too steep, you don't have enough time to get it all done before the surface is now above you and you've had a bad day, right?
Got it.
And so the good thing we have now is that the Deep Space Network, which we use to communicate with our spacecraft, is also how we navigate our spacecraft. And we can, most of the time, we're not just listening to a spacecraft, we actually send it a signal, like a carrier signal. It turns it around and sends it back, because our ability to generate a really good, solid, stable frequency is way better than the spacecraft's. And so we call that two-way. It's when we're in two-way lock with the spacecraft. And just like a few hours before landing, I was watching the residual signal of Curiosity. It was in a two-way lock. And the antenna, the kind of little low-gain antenna on the back of Curiosity during its flight to Mars was rotating. So the whole spacecraft was spinning like a top all the way to Mars at 2 RPM. And the antenna wasn't quite in the middle. It was off to one side. And you could actually see, as a residual Doppler shift, this thing moving about 2 feet in one direction and 2 feet back again as the spacecraft rotated, right? You were down to kind of millimeters per second of precision.
That's incredible.
And our knowledge of where Curiosity was when it hit the top of the atmosphere was to within about 600 meters.
Wow.
And it had traveled 500 million miles. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
And what was cool with Curiosity, and Perseverance has this too, is that it wasn't, all the previous spacecraft basically, you throw it at the top of the atmosphere, fingers crossed, you come out where you come out, and then you parachute down and you land. With Curiosity, we told it where we thought it was going to be when it hit the atmosphere. And from then on, it was propagating that and actually flew through the atmosphere to manage its energy, to make sure it wasn't going to go too long or come up short. And try and aim for the middle of our landing ellipse. Old missions, that landing ellipse, kind of the error of where it could land is anything within about 100 miles long and 20 miles wide.
Wow.
By virtue of being like active as it went through the atmosphere, Curiosity's landing ellipse was about kind of 10 by 3, 4, 5 miles, something like that. I only know because I was still doing data visualization back then, and one of the things I did was the pretty 3D view of Gale Crater with every different potential landing ellipse bolted onto it. And I kept getting new ellipses to do 3D renderings of. And we landed like less than 2 miles from the middle of that landing ellipse.
And the neat thing about using the rocket, the I can't remember what you call it, but the moments of terror, sky crane, yeah, is that if there's like big rocks or something that you don't expect where you think you're going to land, you can divert and go someplace else a little bit, move away. And
so Curiosity was too dumb for that. So Curiosity literally, it was trying to land towards the center of this landing ellipse, and we had certified that ellipse to be clear of, to a certain percentage, like 90-something% of it is this safe for the rover. And you have to certify the entire landing ellipse to be as safe as possible. Perseverance is cleverer than that, in that when the heat shield gets thrown away, the camera will look down at the ground and basically cross-reference what it sees with a map on board and go, okay, I know where I am. I'm exactly here. So I'm going to try and land in that spot that we know is really, really safe. And so now, instead of having to certify an entire 10 by 5 mile zone as safe for landing, you only have to certify enough safe lily pads within that zone that it can reach when it comes to dropping out of the back shell, flying under the rockets, diverting to one of those pads and then landing there.
Oh, cool.
Because the first thing you do when you drop out of the back shell is you wait a couple of seconds, then the rockets get turned on, and the first thing it does is it does a huge divert maneuver, because otherwise the first thing you're going to do is slam straight back into your parachute. So it basically takes a hard left or a hard right, but with Perseverance, it can take a hard whatever direction it needs to take to go and land at a safe spot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's got the Lander Vision System, LVS, and if you try and pronounce LVS quickly, you get Elvis. And so there's with their engineering model that got flown on a helicopter out of Mojave had Elvis on the side.
That's funny. Doug, I don't want to take too much of your time because I know you have work to do. Brad, you want to do some last passes? How you feeling?
Yeah, the last real question I have is, I feel like I didn't go and check like specifically which ones I have in mind here, but I feel like deep space probes and also like some planetary rovers, like you hear very frequently like, oh, we have extended the useful mission life of this thing out like months to years past what we expected it to be. I think that happened. I won't say that happened with one or both of the Voyagers, maybe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, is that kind of extension quietly actually like sort of planned for and expected behind the scenes? Or is that, a bunch of unneeded redundancies being brought online to push things out? Or is or is that just like the smartest engineers in the world just figuring out how to like squeeze blood from a stone over the course of years?
My version of this question is the mission length that you guys say in public, like the MVP, and then everything after that is planned for, but gravy?
The short version is that you said Spirit and Opportunity were going to last 90 days. That's bullshit, right? Okay, that's the short version. Bearing in mind that I have on my wall here my last shift from the Opportunity mission, which was day 5086 of a 90-day mission.
Sure.
Right?
That's some Scotty engineering right there, just to be clear.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of everything. So, when NASA picks a mission, and they pick missions by different means, some of it's competitive, some of it is just assigned, right? You basically, when the check gets cut, for want of a better phrase, they say, okay, look, we're giving you this, but we want 90 days, right? You said 90 days. This is for 90 days. And you're going to make damn freaking sure your spacecraft can last 90 days, right? And so you build redundancy, you build margin. And in the case of, a good case is Spirit and Opportunity, right? They were famously going to last 3 months, and one lasted 6-7 years. The other lasted almost 15 years.
Yeah.
And I can show you the scientific paper written by some of the engineers before launch that said, okay, with this launch window, if we send this design of spacecraft to that landing site with a little bit of margin, it'll die after 110 days. The solar panels will be too dirty, we won't be making enough power, and we will die, just after our 90 days. And legit, it was like 101 days for one of them and like 115 for the other. It was close. Mm-hmm. But there is margin in that modeling. And you get there and you think you know how your spacecraft's going to behave, and you've been as conservative as you can within all the constraints that you've got. You've got your budget constraint, you've got your time constraint, you've got your mass constraint, your volume constraint, your complexity constraint, right? Like, what can you do in the time you have, with the money you have, and the space you have, and the rocket you have? You make it as good as you possibly can within all of those constraints. When it gets there, how does it actually behave? And typically it behaves a little better than your worst case scenario. But you have to assume your worst case scenario, otherwise you're going to fuck up.
Yeah.
So it was generating a bit more power than we thought it would. It was staying a little bit warmer than we thought it would, so you don't have to spend as much energy keeping it warm. And with Spirit and Opportunity, we thought they would get dusty and dusty and dusty, and then so little power on its panels, it would die. Occasionally, with both rovers, one sunny day, we'd wake up in the morning and have a crap ton more power. And it's because the solar panels have been cleaned off by fortuitous gusts of wind and dust devils and stuff like that. And so, but I'll tell you, by the end of Opportunity's mission, she was arthritic and broken and highly forgetful. I mean, of the instruments on the robotic arm, one of the spectrometers was dead. Like, it was dead. It had a small radioactive source in it. The half-life was like 250 days. It had stopped basically being useful like a year in. Yeah. The microscope, sometimes you'd ask it to take a picture and it would go, sorry, what? And you ask again, it would go, oh, microscope. Gosh, shit, yeah, no, I've got one of those. I'll take a picture for you. Its flash memory had got so unreliable, we stopped using it. And so with Opportunity, believe it or not, we would boot the rover up in the morning, immediately basically have a RAM drive to put our data in it.
Wow.
We'd send as much data home as we could in a given UHF pass. Then when the rover went to sleep, if you hadn't got your data, it was just fucking gone, right?
Wow.
Right? Gone. So we were basically using a RAM drive. It was called cripple mode. It was no flash, because the flash memory kept like warm rebooting the vehicle, and it would take weeks to recover and stuff like that.
Oh my.
Here's the best example of why, yes, we plan for 90. We act conservative in the hope that it will last longer, but we were not expecting it to last multiple years. Spare parts are, you build spares of everything, because you don't want Gary the engineer to drop something and suddenly your $2.5 billion spacecraft's going nowhere, right?
Yeah.
So there are spare radios, spare instruments, spare everything. And if you don't need them for the vehicle, you tend to use those spares on your testbed, right? there was a spare radio for Spirit and Opportunity. And the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter Project came along and said, you using that? I'm like, no, you can have it. Like, thanks. And so the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is like an $800 million orbiter, so it's a communication satellite, a weather satellite. It takes pictures of Mars that are as good as Google Earth, right? It's an incredible spacecraft. It has a spare radio from the MER project, Spirit and Opportunity. Unfortunately, it's basically the exact same phone number as Spirit. They're on the exact same frequency in the Deep Space Network channel allocations. There are like 32 different channels. They're on the same channel. If you'd have known that Spirit was still going to be working when MRO got there 2 years later, you would not have given them that radio. Because that now means whenever you try and send commands to MRO, Spirit's like, is that for me? That's me, right? That's my frequency. You're trying to tell me something, but I don't understand this. You're speaking gibberish to me. There must be something wrong with my radio. I'm going into safe mode,
no.
right? And vice versa.
Oh, no.
You send a command to Spirit and MRO picks up. MRO's like, yeah, that's not for me. This is deeply fucked up shit. I'm going into safe mode. And so for years, you couldn't talk to MRO when Spirit was on the side of Mars facing Earth, and you couldn't talk to Spirit when MRO was on the Earth facing side of Mars.
Wow.
It was a nightmare, right? And it's only because, handing out the spare parts bin, but the spacecraft is still going. Now, with Curiosity, we didn't say 90 days. We said 1 Mars year, which is basically 2 Earth years. And that was conservative in a lot of ways. But the main kind of conservative approach is money. Like, it takes money to run these spacecraft. Like, we have salaries, right?
Well, and like DRO time costs money and everything costs money, right?
Yeah. The good thing is we can share the Deep Space Network time. We can share with other Mars missions because one antenna can do multiple missions at a time if they're close enough in the sky that the antenna can be pointed at them, all at the same time. And as far as a Mars rover and a lander and an orbiter are concerned, they're in the same beam width of a Deep Space Network antenna. But yeah, it takes a lot of money. I mean, our budget, and you can look this up in like the budget documentation at Congress and stuff, is MSL is about $50 million a year. Now that's a pretty small kind of up on top of the $2.5 billion it topped to design it, build it, launch it, and operate it for those first 2 years.
Yeah,
an extra year for $50 million is kind of a bargain.
Bonus time,
but it is. And the thing is, and this is something that Steve Squires, who basically is the scientist who made Spirit and Opportunity happen, he wrote in his very good book called Roving Mars. He realized at some point early in the mission, it's like, oh God, we're never going to be done. We will never be finished, because once we're done in a particular location, guess what? We can drive somewhere else and look at that instead. And that's true with Curiosity. We've 8 years in, so we're 6 years over our original 2 years. We're still trucking. Yeah, we have less power than we did when we landed. We don't have solar panels. We have an RTG like the Voyager spacecraft do. And we're down 20-ish%. Anyone can do the math, right, on the half-life of plutonium-238. Yeah. One of our flight computers is basically crap. It's useless. Would you believe it's a flash memory problem? And so we've just reconfigured that to be a lifeboat if we need it. So it'll be the Apollo 13 kind of lunar module if we need it in the future. But our wheels are a little beaten up, but they're still working. The cameras are all still pretty good. We've used some of the consumables inside the rover, but not that many. And so we've just got to the really, really good stuff. We've got to the clay-bearing minerals that can only have been formed in the presence of neutral pH water. And now we're approaching the sulfate-bearing minerals that were probably formed in the presence of kind of acidic, nasty water. And above that is kind of the dry, arid era of Mars. And so ahead of us is this storybook of what the hell happened to Mars. We know it was habitable. We've found all the ingredients life would ever possibly need. We've found rocks that can only have formed in like rocks that formed in the bottom of a river that was flowing in water that was clean enough you could have drunk it, somewhere between ankle and waist deep. That's really specific. Look, that's amazing. Look, and that story is right ahead of us.
The aliens were there and they put their hand in the thing, and then the all the stuff came out and it got sucked back in at the end of the movie is what happened. I think
I got 2 words for you: sandworms. We're approaching this big field of sand dunes right ahead of where Curiosity is right now, and I swear to God, I expect the sandworms just to come flying out right at us.
I hate sandworms. I realize that this is potentially quite risky putting you on record here or whatever, but is there a narrative emerging around that stuff? Is there kind of a general line of thought yet about what that event or that period of Martian history might have been, or are we not? Do we just not have the data yet to quite start piecing that? I mean, obviously, like, you're talking about like there potentially was running water and standing water, and like there might have been more of an atmosphere at one point and stuff like that. But like, is there kind of a shape of an overall story yet, or are we not there?
We don't know all the details. I mean, here's a brilliant case study. Like a week ago, we drove past 2 big rocks that were sat kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they're kind of shiny. And in fact, they're probably metallic meteorites just sat on the ground. Their very existence, the size they are, means that Mars must have had a much thicker atmosphere at some point in the past. Because if you tried to throw that rock at the Martian atmosphere now, it would hit the ground so quickly, it would be smashed to pieces.
Interesting.
Because of the thinness of the atmosphere today. Right. Their very existence on the surface today tells you there must have been a thicker atmosphere in the past. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. Right? It's a really cool, like, we think Mars once had a thick atmosphere. You're damn right it did. Otherwise, this rock wouldn't be here. Right? It's really cool. Yeah. The kinds of minerals, the clay-bearing minerals that we've seen around where Curiosity's been the past couple of years can only have formed in the presence of liquid water at neutral pH. The form early on in the mission, especially, like it looked like concrete slabs had been smashed up because you got little round pebbles rolled up in the sandstones because it formed at the bottom of a flowing river. And you can figure out how fast that river is flowing based on how round those rocks are, right? And how far down the river you must be based on how small they are and stuff like that. It's amazing what the scientists can figure out from the evidence we have. Now, the assumption is Mars's atmosphere slowly wafted away. As it did, the planet gets colder, the water kind of goes subsurface or boils off. And as a result, Mars then becomes colder and drier and colder and drier and colder and drier. And it doesn't take great leap of faith to think that, okay, that sulfate-bearing unit is kind of the last vestige of an aqueous Martian history where there's not a lot of it around. What there is so rich in whatever crap's underground anyway, it's kind of basically sulfuric acid is what's left. And then you keep going a bit more, and now you're left with just this dry desert we have today, but it's still geologically active. Like rocks are getting eroded, sand is getting blown around. I see that sand land on my freaking lenses every now and again. And the real detail of exactly what happened is going to be in the layers of rock that are literally about 400 meters ahead of where Curiosity is right now. We've driven 25K, and we're like 400 meters from the real meat of the mission.
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
There's something really melancholy about that story, honestly. Like this.
It's a billion-year tragedy.
Potentially, yeah. This like potentially formerly much more like lush or robust planet, kind of slowly dwindling over eons.
So in Gale Crater is like 100 miles wide. It was probably a crater when it was wet, but there wasn't a mountain in the middle. The mountain has come since, and it is probable that Gale Crater was a giant lake. Wow. And it would have been really pretty. Like if you take the views we have and kind of up-res them with some, maybe a bit of snowfall or some rainfall, a nice river, right? The sky's gonna be a different color, sun's out, nice and warm. It would have been absolutely spectacular.
I guess we can at least take faith that some nice artist renderings will be commissioned once we have, we have a clearer picture. Somebody will at least visualize that stuff for us, which is at least nice to look forward to. That's cool. That's cool, but kind of sad.
Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Crap,
we really appreciate it.
Like instantly one of my favorite conversations I have ever had in my life. Actually, like
as you can see, we are incredibly lucky and privileged to work on the mission we do, and it genuinely is one of the best parts of doing a mission like this is getting to tell people about it. So it's an absolute pleasure.
It is honestly like a tremendous honor is the only way I can describe being able to talk about something like this.
There's so much more. I want to talk about one of the things that. There's a ton more stuff I'd love to talk about, but I think we've taken enough of your time, and we'll have to see if we can get you back later at some point in the future again if you have another hour sometime to spend.
Absolutely.
Real quick, just kind of parting question, since not to speak for your time, but if we do maybe get you back at some point,
keep going.
Does your experience on this project immediately make you eligible to move on to Perseverance at some point, or is like that a whole new bidding process if who gets to work on that?
So they've. The staffing crunch problem we have is that a lot of people on MSL have been poached over to from Curiosity over to Perseverance, and so it's kind of the remaining skeleton crew on the deck of the good ship Curiosity trying to keep her active and busy and healthy. The staffing challenge is like, okay, the new hotness is always going to get the money, it's always going to get the people it needs, and our challenge is to keep a hold of the people we need to keep the mission going.
That's fair.
And it's not easy. some of us have basically said, look, I'm not prepared to work Mars time. I have a small family. It's not fair on them for me to work Mars time for 3 months. So I'm out. I'm not doing Perseverance.
You guys take this hot early period.
And like, we've picked people for our team because like I have an engineering camera uplink lead in training right now whose wife has said, you're not doing Mars time. I'm like, I'll take you. You can come to Curiosity because you're not going to get stolen by Perseverance. At some point, I'm sure I'll go work on Perseverance. The engineering camera team on Perseverance are former Curiosity engineering camera team. Like I trained some of them on MSL. But not for a while. I've got other roles I'm training for on Curiosity. I'm kind of diversifying my portfolio of responsibilities on Curiosity because I love this mission. I love the people. I love what we're doing with it. I genuinely think even though it's an 8-year-old rover, its best days are yet to come.
Yeah, like you said, that you're right on the cusp of the good stuff, right?
The creativity and the cunning it's going to take to keep doing good stuff with an aging, decrepit old rover with decreasing power, decreasing money, right, is a really interesting challenge and one that I'm really looking forward to. But then someone will say, hey, Curiosity's kind of winding down a bit. Want to come take some 20 megapixel color pictures? I'll be like, oh, shit.
Well,
yeah, fine.
So put it that way.
You've won me with your color goodness, you bastards.
Europa Express, there's all sorts of other stuff coming too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Europa Clipper. The surface mission people tend to be surface mission people quite a lot of the time because it's kind of a different paradigm. Like when you're just an orbiter, like a Mars orbiter, or you're going to be like the Europa Clipper mission, Isaac Newton is driving all the time. And so you know where you're going to be 2 weeks from now. So you can plan everything months in advance.
Yeah.
With Curiosity, we don't know what's just over the next hill. And so the story changes, which is why we have to do planning on the day-to-day. And so it's a different mindset. It's a different game. And I've seen people go from like missions like Cassini. We had some Cassini people. When Cassini finished a couple of years ago, they moved to Curiosity. Some of them got it. Some of them just didn't. And they went off to go work Europa Clipper instead. So it's really cool.
Okay, the 5 people under the age of 40 on the Discord will kill me if I don't ask this. But does that mean you all are hiring? And if so, like how does one get a job at JPL? Like what do you all look for?
So JPL has more work to do than it is capable of doing, I would say, and we'll be farming stuff out in the not too distant future if we're not careful. We are hiring. JPL has a jobs page. It is big. It has a lot of vacancies on it. I will warn you that some of those vacancies are kind of standing vacancies that sit there so that a particular bit of JPL can hire people at will. Like that's a pipeline to hire somebody. Mm-hmm. Any big company does that. But a lot of them are real. The trick is to try and figure out exactly who is involved. Like it doesn't take a great leap to figure out who is involved in a particular project at JPL. You can email them in the blind and say, hey, Mr. This, Dr. That, whoever, I saw this job posting about this project. Can you tell me more about it? Learn more about it before you go and apply. The other way, especially for younger people, is internships. I have an engineering camera team member who she started training. She joined JPL at the beginning of this year. Then like 2 months later, it's like, go home. Poor person. She started training on the engineering cameras basically in about May, June. She's certified as an engineering camera uplink lead in September and fully certified to operate the cameras on her own just after Thanksgiving. She had been an intern for 4 consecutive summers at JPL. And she'd worked on a bunch of different projects. She'd worked on Europa Clipper. She'd worked on another mission I was involved in for a while. She worked on Mars 2020, different parts of different projects. And after her last internship, at the end of your internship, you go around and you speak to people who are hiring. And she came and spoke to us. And we're like, you're awesome. You want to come work with us? And she's like, yeah, right. It's that simple.
You have a pre-made relationship at that point. That's great.
And in fact, like I am speaking to a potential intern tomorrow morning. Our little team normally has 1 intern for each summer. We canceled it this year just because we're just getting our heads around remote operations. We don't know how we'll also handle trying to kind of mentor an intern at the same time. But we're in a better space now. We know next year's internships are going to be remote. And so we put out an AO for an internship, and the first thing we've done is offer first right of refusal to the person we cancelled on this year and said, hey, look, we're in better shape. We're going to do our internships this coming year. Are you still interested? And I'm going to speak to them tomorrow because they got an interesting resume. They're interested in what we're doing. I'm like, okay, come play with us for 12 weeks. Let's see how it goes.
Well, in remote, it makes it more accessible to people who can't necessarily get to California as well, right? Yeah.
I mean, generally, they still like it, especially mission operations, used to be commutable. But we have let some of our team members, like younger team members especially, of like, I just want to go home and spend this craziness with my family instead. And so our most recent certified engineering camera person is back home with family in Hawaii. And I'm like, take us with you.
Yeah, I would go there.
And she's just extended. So she's like, you know what? I was going to be there for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I might as well stay till March. I'm like, you might as well. That's a really good idea. But generally speaking, at some point we will start moving back to the lab, even if it's only a few days a week on lab and the rest of the time at home, which I think is what everyone would rather have in the future. But the notion of having remote operations, and also there are ways to get involved in our missions that aren't, working for NASA or working for JPL. There are subcontractors that build the stuff on our spacecraft that then operate the stuff on our spacecraft. There's a camera team called Malin Space Science Systems down in San Diego who build almost all the cool cameras on our spacecraft. There's a robotics company in Pasadena called Honeybee Robotics. Their headquarters are in Pasadena and Manhattan, and they've built mechanisms for a whole bunch of spacecraft, and they still command them. There are subcontractors and there are ways of getting involved that aren't just NASA. We're not the only game in town. And those other kind of less traditional pathways are way more interesting, I think.
Cool. Brad, you good?
Yeah, I think we should probably save the rest of our questions for hopefully another time.
We should do it again, yeah.
Obviously,
Doug,
you've got a robot to attend to.
Thank you so much. And for listeners, if you like this, please let us know. Thank Doug in the Discord. He's in there on the reg. And like I think Brad and I need to figure out a process to maybe have like a nomination process or something for other like I would like to do more of these patron spotlights.
Absolutely.
Patron. So if you can think of somebody that you think would make a good person to spotlight in the Discord, please let us know. And we'll talk to them, see if they're able to do it. And I would love to make this a regular thing. This was really cool, Doug.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cannot thank you enough for your time.
Absolutely a pleasure. And you've accidentally made this really lovely community. And it's honestly, it's a huge amount of fun to be a part of it. So I was more than happy to do this.
I mean, we're kind of just blown away on the day-to-day. So do you have anything you want to plug? This is the plugging opportunity. Space?
Pay your taxes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They pay my wages.
Okay.
You know what? The twitter.com/Doug _Ellison. Come for the space, stay for the snark. That'll probably do it.
It's a lovely combo.
Okay, that'll do it for us on this month's Patreon episode. Thank you all for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. And thanks again, Doug. This was really cool.
Thank you again to Doug for stopping by and talking to us about the action at JPL. I guess, what am I thanking him like from a year and a half in the future?
We've already thanked him enough. He's fine.
Retroactive thanks. We love having Doug on though. And thank you also to all of our patrons, as always, and especially our executive producer tier patrons. I've never done this before. How am I doing?
You're doing great. Keep going.
I got to read some names now. Thank you, executive producers, including Battle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Octothorpe Bunny Crimes, Just Wedge, Jacob Chappell, Joel Krauska, Twinkie's Got a Pick and Place, and James Kamek. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
And I guess we'll be back hopefully next week with another episode. We were hoping to do a JWST episode this week. So
yeah, I'm torn on whether we need an expert for that. I mean, we almost certainly need an expert for that. But
I think an expert would make it better is how I feel.
I definitely agree with you. But you know what? I bet experts on the JWST are fairly in demand right now.
I bet it's a hot ticket right now in the expert economy. But maybe we can get an astrologer to talk about JWST with us instead.
Basically, they both say astro in them, right? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah,
People love that.
Pretty much.
See you all next week. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.